My cousin and I both remember a room that apparently doesn't exist. When we were both around 10, my cousin was having family problems and my mom invited her to stay with us while it got sorted out. It was pretty fun, kind of like having a temporary sister. We ended up talking about it a few years ago, reminiscing about the weird things. Just the things we would go do together and some of the memories that stood out the most. Who kept trying to steal my pillow off the bottom bunk when we were trying to get some sleep. Only problem was, we didn't have a dog, and I never had a bunk bed. For whatever reason, I'd never considered how little sense the memory made. Thinking maybe she was just going along with the story, I asked her what color the bed frame was. She thought about it for a second and then answered red. She was right. According to my mother, we never stayed over at anyone's house. And if we had, I still remember what her friends' houses looked like. None of them had red bunk beds, and I still have no idea what happened or why that happened. When I was 19 and my best friend was 20, we are nearly 40 now. We were driving back to my house after visiting someone at work. We were on a somewhat busy road and it was getting dark, but wasn't quite dark yet. There were street lights and business lights everywhere, so visibility was still great. This road was 3 lanes in each direction, and there was a concrete median dividing the traffic. I was in the left lane next to the median, and a traffic light was coming up. I saw a man standing in the median a good way before where the crosswalk for the light would be. It instantly made me nervous, and as soon as I thought that, he stepped out to cross the street. My best friend and I both instantly braced for impact as I slammed on my brakes. We went right through him. We didn't hit him, and because there was a car to my right, I wasn't able to swerve out of my lane to avoid hitting the man. I looked in my rear view and there wasn't anyone there. I had come to a complete stop and we physically turned around in our seats to see how he had jumped out of the way. There was no one there and no way he could have ran off or hidden anywhere that fast. We both turned toward each other and almost in sync asked each other, "Did you see that man?" We both saw the same thing. A man. I couldn't describe his face, but it was a man's form, and both of us remember being confused as to why he would be wearing a white robe, and both being terrified that he stepped out in front of us, like he was committing suicide. I had a baby in the back seat even, and she was about 3 months old. She had been crying during the drive and went silent when we came up to a screeching stop, which added to the weirdness of it all. We still bring it up occasionally, and neither of us can really come up with any sort of explanation for what we saw other than that it was something supernatural. Also, we both saw the white cloth fling across the windshield like he was hitting it, but there was no impact. I mean, just nothing at all. He literally went through the car. I have a friend who once told me about a time when he was in his teens. He slept in a bunk bed with his brother in the lower bunk. He said he dreamt a demon wearing the skin of a man threatened to kill his brother, and in order to save him, he somehow managed to procure a knife and put the knife to the neck of the demon. The demon tells him, "The only way to rid evil is through evil." He hesitated and woke up to find he was pressing a butcher knife under the neck of his younger brother. He was still sleeping, fortunately, but when he awoke, he told the same dream exactly, except he was attacked by his brother in the dream and said the exact same thing. The only way to rid evil is through evil. Nothing similar happened after that, and it gave me some serious issues that led him to go through psychotherapy for a while. Growing up, my brother beat the shit out of me constantly. I'm talking like cut eyes, bloody noses, police called beatings. One day at the library, I was reading a book about some tribe who believed you can go into people's dreams and cast a sickness on them. So I did all the pre-dream groundwork described in the book, and that night I went to sleep and had a dream. In the dream, I was at one end of a long road and my brother was at the other end. I lifted my hand and pointed at him. "I cast a sickness on you." The next day we're watching TV and he said, "I feel like shit. You have mono." I don't even know why I thought of that, but it was the first thing that came to mind. "Fuck you, bitch," was all he said, and the conversation was over. A week later, it turns out he did have mono. I was freaked out. I was pretty sure I was a witch and would burn in hell. To compound matters, I had a friend whose dad was a professor. We'd get stoned with him and he'd always tell me random facts. I'm at his house and he starts telling me about this tribe that went into people's dreams and cast sickness. Man, I was paranoid as fuck that people would learn this horrible thing I did. I stole a picture from one of the historic houses in Old Town San Diego on Halloween for fun with my girlfriend. The picture was painted in the 1800s. It was Jesus praying in a hallway, and upon closer examination, there was an alternate black devil-looking Jesus hidden. I saw the shadows of the painting. Took it home and put it in the closet. Randomly, on nights I would smell the worst smell in the world and wake up and see what looked like a black smoke cloud. I moved 3 times and still saw the same shit. Finally, my roommate saw the same thing, so I knew I wasn't crazy. Long story short, I brought the picture back to where I got it and told one of the employees what I did and apologized, and she replied, "Don't worry, they always come back to us." I'm not quite sure what to classify this as. People I've spoken with about this experience have theories that it could be anything from a lucid dream to the bizarre and supernatural. My in-laws annually rent a cottage in the summer for the whole family to come together. My wife is from a family of 3 boys and a girl, and most everyone is married with kids. Needless to say, the cottages are typically quite large, and even then, things get cozy. That said, it was just another night in a new place. The bedroom we had faced the front of the house and was right above the porch. It was one of those structures where the steep slant of the roof affected the upper rooms, and we were right under the steeple. It's well after midnight and everyone is settling down for bed. I think my wife had dozed off an hour or so prior, as she usually does, and I was left to my own devices. I was feeling tired after reading and decided to go tuck in for the night. Lights out, book down, good night. Here's where things started to get a bit odd. A handful of hours later, likely in the 3 a.m., 4 a.m. time slot, I woke up with a start. Not entirely unnatural, as I fall into either a feather-light sleep or the type of sleep that could survive a tornado. Across from me, tucked in just under the lowest part of the roof slant, is a large man. Now, my youngest brother-in-law stands at 6'4" and is a heavy-set dude. At a glance, this is who I thought was standing in my room. I sit up in bed and look at him. Confused, I say, "Andy, what are you doing in here?" The longer I look at this person, though, the more I realize it couldn't possibly be my brother-in-law. Forget the creep factor if it was him. This would be then a completely different story. The reasons I concluded that this was not him were as follows. The angle of the roof appeared to intersect with the upper torso of the figure, and yet I somehow felt as if I could perceive the entire figure. It was like looking at a really trippy optical illusion. I could see the full person, but my brain also in some way identified that it was impossible to visualize someone as large as I thought I was seeing, when the only clearance that portion of the room offered was 4 feet max. The second reason was that the clothing was off. The face was heavily bearded, and, well shit, the face looked like it was decaying. The second I became aware of this, I felt a wave of incredible terror wash over me. I swear to whatever god you do or do not believe in, that this thing turned toward me in what seemed like slow motion, and then faster than I could perceive, it was right next to my bed. I remember nothing more of the night after that. Want to up the creep factor? Sure, why not? My mother-in-law, a true-blooded Hungarian, whom I often jest is a gypsy, is sitting across with me, having breakfast the next morning. She looks at me and quietly asks, "What can you tell me about your visitor last night?" I had no words. I eventually told her what little I remembered, and she just smiled and nodded. We never spoke of it again. 6 years ago, I was hanging out with my siblings in our yard during a clear, sunny day around high noon, and I suddenly caught something moving in the sky out of the corner of my eye. When I turned to get a better look, I couldn't reconcile what the fuck I was seeing. It was a metal cube just gliding through the air pretty high up. I proceeded to absolutely lose my shit, and my sibs saw it as well before it disappeared behind some trees. We ran to the other side of the trees, but it was already gone? It still creeps me out to think about it. We did live right next to a military base, so make of that what you will. The thing had all the aerodynamics of a literal brick, though. I mean, it was the strangest thing to see. Let me preface this with my morning routine. Wake up at 4:30 a.m., out of the door by 5:15, clock in at work at 5:50 or so a.m. Never fails unless major traffic incident on the highway. Anyhow, one morning this past August, I'm out of the door as usual, minimal traffic on the road, yada yada. Now, my boss calls me halfway through my commute. Hey, you coming in? And I say, yeah, why do you ask? Well, it's 6:30 a.m. and you usually call if you're going to be late. What? I look at my dashboard and... What? It's 6:30 a.m. Somewhere between leaving my door and getting on the road, I lost about an hour of time. My grandfather had a couple stories of what he was convinced were angels. Random dudes in unmarked but not German uniforms walking through machine gun fire and not even being hurt. And the time he and his friends found a fully gassed up Jeep full of food after being lost for days, well into previously occupied territory and far from any Allied bases, like someone had dropped it there for them. This happened roughly 17-ish years ago at an old apartment during the summer. One night, my upstairs bathroom started transmitting some kind of very loud and staticky voices that sounded like it was from a pilot in an airplane or something similar. It was so loud that my neighbor immediately came over and asked if I was hearing something loud like they were. I asked her to come upstairs and listen to this and asked what they think it is, and she is just as freaked out as I am. So now we're both upstairs listening to this very loud and static-filled garbled talk that is seemingly coming from nowhere, since there's no radio devices and no TVs upstairs. We both quickly start looking for what the hell this thing could possibly be and end up finding nothing. We both surmised that it was probably coming from the bathroom power outlets, since that was the only thing in the bathroom besides towels and a few other regular bathroom items. We're completely dumbfounded though, and didn't know what was going on, and we did the only thing we could think of and called the electric company. The person on the other end probably thought we were pranking them, but it was dead serious and we tried to figure out what was happening. And then it started getting so loud that it became unbearable to stay up there for more than a minute at a time. And the best way I could describe the sound is it sounded like someone amped up a megaphone to the point to where you couldn't understand the voice and filled it with weird distortion effects. After an hour, the noise stopped completely and it never happened again. To this day, I have no clue what it could have been or what happened up there. I saw my mom holding my baby sister in her arms and taking her to bed. Not weird, right? My mom was still pregnant with my sister at the time. I went to her kitchen and saw her still in there. Still pregnant. I was driving down the highway about 3 a.m. when a semi-truck pulled alongside me and then swerved into my lane, running me off the road and down a very steep incline. I remember going over and gunned the engine, which I don't know why, but as I was going downhill I kept telling myself to step on the brake. I couldn't move it like someone was holding my foot down. Then I heard this voice tell me, okay, now you could step on the brake. Neither my infant daughter nor myself were injured, and the only damage to the car was a hole in the oil pan. Both the tow truck and the highway patrol officer was incredulous that I didn't roll the car. They told me if I had tried to stop any sooner that I would have probably killed us both. I was sitting at my computer with my door kind of cracked open, just enough to where I could see out. My door is right next to my desk, so I can see out. I then see like 5 men in suits walk up to the stairs and start walking to my room. I should be freaking out, but I can't seem to move my head. Then they reach my room and kick the door open all the way. And then suddenly, I could move my head again. All the men are gone, but my door is wide open. Still freaky to think about sometimes. In my hometown, there is a ghost story about a large gray bull that roams the local farms and bellows when seen only to vanish into thin air. When I was in Boy Scouts, I heard this story at a meeting and it made my blood run cold and gave a distinct taste of salt in my mouth. One of my earlier memories was being in the bottom of our fields at home and walking back uphill towards our house. I looked up, and in front of me was a gigantic grayish blue bull standing between me and the house. I had never even seen it before, and we didn't even have cows, so when it bellowed, I just turned tail and ran down through the field. When I looked back behind me in a wide open field with nowhere to go, it was gone. My grandmother didn't believe me, of course, but years later, she was our den mother. And when that story was being told, I looked up at her across the room, and she was already looking at me, white as a ghost. When I was a freshman in high school, I was up early to get ready for school, like a lot of teenagers do. My brother slept till 7:30, but I was dressed by 7:15 or something. Call it me trying way too hard. Well, we live in the middle of nowhere, on my family farm. My neighbor is my grandmother, and the other is my aunt, each a good half-mile apart. I was putting on my makeup, and the sun was up, and at this point I was 100% awake. I saw something outside of my window. One of the blinds had been tilted so you could see out even with the blinds pulled. I thought it was our cat, so I peeked out the blinds to be sure. I was going to pull the blinds open and scare it, but when I peeked out, I saw a boy. He had blonde hair and wore a white long-sleeved shirt and like some undershirt from the 18th century and tan pants. It was very strange attire. I watched him look toward the sun, look left and then over his shoulder, and at that point, I got mad. I thought this kid couldn't be more than 12 or 13, and here he was trying to peek in on me. I stomped outside ready to grab this little shit by his ear and find out who he was and why he was doing what he was doing. I get outside and he's gone. There's not many places he could have hid, but there weren't any footprints in the dew-covered grass either. I started to think about it, and the kid wasn't tall enough to reach the crooked blind, and there wasn't really anything for him to stand on. I quickly ran around the well house and tried to look for footprints anywhere, but I virtually saw no trace of this boy. I went in the house and back to my room and past my brother's room and saw they were still both asleep. They both have dark brown, almost black hair. It's been almost 20 years since that happened, but I'll never forget that kid. I also can't remember his eyes when I tried to picture them. So in my memory, his eyes are black. I do remember how he stood slightly crouched, his clothes, his hair, even how he turned, but never his eyes. I walked the 2 miles home from my closing shift at Taco Bell. The whole time I felt uneasy. When I get home, I have a brief moment of relief as I shut down and lock the door. I still lived with my folks back then in their split foyer house. The basement on the front of the house was half underground while the back is not. So at the entryway, I turned on the basement light for a second, just to make sure the floor is clear of my brother's toys. After confirming it was, I turned off the light and walked down the stairs. Sometimes you get that sensation in the corner of your eye that something's there, and before you realize what's going on, you're staring something outside the window. Only I saw red, glowing eyes staring back at me. I was frozen. It had to have been over 7 feet tall, and then I bolted into my room, got under the covers and stayed there for a few minutes hoping I was just imagining it. Then the back porch door opened, and my dog, who was kenneled right next to the inside door to the same porch, starts going ape shit. Thank God for that, I thought, as I heard the porch door open and close again. I was digging a grave for a passed-on pet in the woods behind my house. I leaned on my shovel to stop for a break. I saw some kind of animal dart in front of me and leaned forward to look at it closely. It had vanished. Next thing I knew, I woke up lying on the ground and for some reason didn't worry about it. I just got up and began digging again. It was a hot summer in the mountain, so when I got weak and exhausted, a little later I figured I was getting heat exhaustion. So I went back to my mom's house to cool off, and she freaked out because I was all covered in blood. I had a big skip mark cut on the very top of my scalp, like something very sharp had skipped across my head, kind of like a skipping stone. It was the middle of a property that backs to a big multi-county lake a mile or two back, and on the other side was just dense forest my family owned. No idea what it was. We're all convinced that something is going on in the flat above the one my parents have lived in since 2002. For starters, all of us, me, my siblings, our parents, as well as some of our neighbors, occasionally heard furniture being dragged across the floor when no one was currently living there. Sometimes we'd hear the footfalls of a running child as well. And there is also the fact that in the years since we moved there, 2 different married couples lived there, both divorced within a year. A third couple came the brink of divorce to the point to where they stopped living together for a while. She went to her parents' home, I think, and he also went to stay somewhere else. Apparently, in their time away, they mended things, and after hearing stories about that flat, decided to move out, and I have no idea if they're still together as of now. Actually, before I moved out in 2009, a couple was remodeling it. Apparently spent a ton of money on it, but their relationship fell apart and they never actually got married. Every few weeks, my girlfriend or I will catch sight of colorful lights moving past our 3rd-story apartment window at night. I, the Scully of the relationship, am convinced it is some trick of the light, with a police car flashing lights reflecting off of something and bouncing back to our window. My girlfriend is certain that someone is flying drone past our window to spy on us. I always run out to check as soon as I see the lights, but I never see a drone. The lights look like a drone, but they can move too fast and they move through tree branches, so I don't think it's a drone. It could be aliens, though. Okay, so here's some background. There's a compound near where I grew up that is supposedly decommissioned, AT&T Cold War Communications Center. It sits at the end of a dead-end road isolated from any houses nearby. On the outside, it looks like a small, mundane 2-story building. Nothing exciting at all until you find out the building is actually many stories deeper. The entire building rests on a bed of springs to absorb shock from explosions and features an underground parking structure adjacent. Over the years, there have been theories that it was a missile silo, UFO research center, and something about a dark cloud full of lightning hovering just above it on an otherwise clear day. Prior to decommission, you could drive down that road until you almost reach a guard station. I say almost because doing so resulted in being engulfed in floodlights with a military-type security team armed with assault rifles demanding you turn around immediately. As far as I know, no one to this day knows what really went on in there or what the inside looks like. In high school, my pal bounced a bouncy ball in his room so hard that we never saw it again. We tore that room up and never ended up actually finding it. I worked the overnight shift at an AM radio station back in the 90s. I saw a car come down the driveway to the parking lot. We went out to see who it was and the car was just gone. I would have seen if it had turned around or blacked out. Though I thought I was going nuts until the announcer strolled out of the studio and said, "What happened to that car?"